I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and co-host of Poured Over, and today I am so excited to be talking to Chloé Caldwell. She is a writer at large, an essayist, the author of the novella Women that I personally love, and now her new book, Trying, is out now and is a wonderful, heartfelt, funny, and sometimes painful memoir. And I was hoping you could start by just sort of setting up the book for us and why you wanted to tell this story now.
Hmm. Well, I wouldn't say that it was I wanted to tell it now because I started this book in 2021 and now we're in 2025. So when I began it, I was at a writing residency and my previous book, The Red Zone, was like about to be sent to the printer. So I could finally like work on something else. And so what I had on my mind at the time was trying to get pregnant and unexplained infertility. I can't remember if at that point I had been diagnosed with it or not, but I was in the very like early stages of getting pregnant, although it had been maybe half a year to a year, which can feel like a really long time. So I just started writing down anecdotes and observations and vignettes about all of it because I'm always really aware as a writer that things are fleeting. And I always know, okay, well, I will not be able to write about this with the same sense of urgency and pain, I suppose, that I'm feeling in 10 years as I am now. Like I'm really just I guess morbid in ways too. I really feel like the passing of time and I'm like, well, I better capture this now because I won't be struggling with this when I'm 50, right? And at the time I was 36 and I called it 36 Notes on Trying. And it was an essay, more of a list of sorts. And I had a couple of friends read it and I submitted it to some literary journals and it didn't find a home. So I just continued adding to it. And so I hadn't found a book where the narrator didn't get pregnant in the end in memoir and in nonfiction. And I thought that it could be really interesting to have a sort of different kind of book about irresolution because I was becoming frustrated with all of the memoirs I would buy and search for and look up, and I'd be like, oh, great, this one is about unexplained infertility too. And then just by reading the back of the book, it was like, okay, and then this person does IVF, and then I would Google them, and now they have a baby. And I was like, okay, so I can't find my narrative anywhere. So I began writing it in real time because at the time I didn't know, of course, if I would get pregnant, wouldn't get pregnant. I did know I had a strong aversion to IVF, so I knew it wasn't going to be an IVF book. And that in itself was kind of lonely and isolating because it's really hard to find people that said no to that route. So the book explores that a bit too. So I really just kept adding to it over the years. And then I sold it in 2023. So 2 years after I began it, to my editor, Yuka Igarashi at Grey Wolf. She had been my editor on my previous book. And I sold it as, yeah, observations about infertility and how this was kind of missing in the marketplace of books where maybe the person doesn't get pregnant and then what, right? What's the story there? What's the plot line? Because pregnancy itself has such a inherent plot line, right? It's like person can't get pregnant and then they like go up, climb up the hill and they do IVF and it's really hard, it's awful, and then they go down the hill and they have the baby and then it's over. So I was like, well, what's the shape of this other thing, right? So I sold it in that context. And about 2 months later, 2-ish months later was when my life like drastically changed. And I say my editor and I talk about what's the difference of blowing up your life versus your life having been blown up by someone else. But my life was blown up by my ex-husband, and all of this stuff came to the surface. And very quickly. I mean, really quickly, like 2 days later, I was like living in a new apartment. Everything, every single thing changed except for writing this book, really. So at that point, I had to have some conversations with my editor, and we were like, well, what is the book? What is the book now? Do we do a different book? Do we do a divorce book? Do we just work this into the book? And I was really like, I just wanted to keep going with the book because at that point, we were kind of referencing it as like the trying book. And I was like, well, trying is that's such a vague word, and it can really be about anything. So what does trying for a family look like when you're divorced and queer and single, right? So I kept going, and also I was on a contract and I was on a deadline, right? I might have abandoned it had I not been. Who knows what I would have done? Probably not, because I am pretty good at getting to the end of my books. um, but I take that stuff really seriously, and I felt such an honor to be working with Grey Wolf. I love their books, and I thought, well, this is going to be a weird book. This is going to be an experimental book, and this is completely a Grey Wolf book. Like there's no other publisher that it could have gone to. So I felt like I was in the right home to really experiment. And especially since my editor and I had worked together before, she knows how I work and my brain, and she lets me try things. And it's very non-prescriptive. And she'll ask me questions, and we kind of find the form together. So we really just embarked on that. And so by the end, we had put it in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And in Act 3 is where the shift begins.
I love the idea of talking about what a book about trying means, or what a book about infertility. It does feel often very prescriptive, that there are these certain narratives that are comfortable for people to read and to access, and we're used to, like you said, someone is trying, they go through the steps that we all know, and then they have a baby, or they don't, and it's this like very sad, very like, this is the, the bad way that this can end. And I think too, it's also a weird, there's so many, even like trying as a statement is like a euphemism almost, for what this whole process is. It's like a comfortable way of saying, oh, we're trying. It's a very
Yeah,
comfortable thing. And this is not a book about having this experience be comfortable. And I really appreciated being able to go through and be like, oh, this is different.
yeah, that's interesting. That trying, when people say, "Yeah, that's so interesting." I didn't even think of that. Like, oh, we're trying for a baby. There's something like cozy about it. It's like, oh wow, that's so beautiful. You guys are creating a family. And in my experience, it was just like it was pure hell. It was so isolating. No one could relate, especially when you do have I mean, I shudder at even calling it a diagnosis. It's definitely not a diagnosis to have like unexplained infertility, because it has the word unexplained there. Like, so it's sort of an oxymoron, but when you don't have something to point to of why you're not getting pregnant, it brings in a whole other set of problems, because there's no conversation you can have with people, right? Like if it were something like, oh yeah, I found out I have endometriosis, or I have two closed fallopian tubes, there's kind of like there's a reason, and there's a period, and there's like this finality. But when you have nothing of that, you're really, really floating in limbo, and it lends itself to prescriptive conversations where people are recommending and suggesting like unsolicited advice, if you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. So I wanted the book to bring that into like the whole like wellness culture that we live in. And it's like, well, if you're not getting pregnant, you're not doing something right. You're not at the right acupuncturist. You're not having the right smoothie. You're not using the right brand, right?
Yeah, it's very, everyone has an opinion, but also it doesn't seem like they really want to be that involved. It's like
Yeah,
they want to give you these ideas from afar, and then, but if you get too in depth, get too real, it's like they're not really interested in the realities of how you feel. It's
it's a really good
and
point.
I think that being able to read from your perspective, I think your work is so often very open. I mean, I think you have a great ability to be able to be honest in a way that feels it doesn't feel like necessarily blunt or like too in your face. It's just very open. And that, I think, can be a stressor for people when they don't know how to respond to that.
Completely. And that's like, there's a part in the book where I reference a book I had bought in my 20s because the title was Surviving Dreaded Conversations. And I thought the title was so funny. And we do have those in life, dreaded conversations. I mean, people talk about this a lot of asking a person if they want kids, just these like sort of inappropriate, like that's a dreaded conversation, and talking about trying, but it's been like people like that conversation, to your point, if it's been like 3 months, 6 months, but once it's like 2 years, it really like deadens the conversation and no one knows what to say anymore.
And I feel like when I was reading through, there was just these moments of like, I haven't been in that position, but I felt like you were. It's like if you reading this book in a lot of ways feels like talking to a friend and having this friend be like, "Look, this is what I'm going through right now," in a way that I was absolutely thinking of things I've never thought before. And so much of that is just how do you approach people in when they are going through something that you don't understand or that isn't your reality. There's so often when, in seeing other pregnant people or having to watch like your acupuncturist get pregnant
Yeah.
and not, and have to like reckon with this is you can't pull back from all of these people, but it doesn't feel like you hope it feels.
Yeah, that's true. There's a part in the book that was like a later addition to the book where my mom says something like really profound, which is like, until it happens to you, people don't care. Like, until it happens to you. And then she goes, until it happens to you or someone you love, meaning like infertility. We were talking about COVID at the time, I believe, but it was like COVID, infertility, cancer, dementia, an autoimmune disorder. It's like things are so off our radar until they become personal in our family and our friends and our chosen family and ourselves. And that's really interesting, right? Because when I went into infertility world, there's so much. I mean, it's all over Reddit. It's all over Discord. There's hundreds of thousands of people like all suffering, and there's all this terminology. It's just like with anything you get interested in, right? It's the same with like pens, right? Like if you can go into like pen world, like, and then you get there and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know there's so much information and there's all these people like coming together and helping each other and whatever. But if you are like, oh, I don't want kids, or if you had a baby naturally and you never, went into that world, you just don't know the terms and the isolation of that. Like I remember talking with friends at the time of like trying, and they didn't know what an IUI was or what IVF was. Like you don't know unless you're experiencing it, which I get, that's how life is. But that was really brought to light for me because I was going through so many, like, I don't want to say taboos, but like, yeah, things that make people uncomfortable, like all around the same time. So it was like infertility, then it's like divorce. Like it's just a lot of things that, yeah, surviving dreaded conversations basically. But I'm like, to your point, I am really open and I am very much in reality. So I do just like name things, and I'm okay with talking about grief and really, I think, uncomfortable things. And I'm also in a specific world of writing and reading, and my students are writing these things. So for me, it's just a day-to-day thing. It's not like, oh my God, that person's crying. It's just like completely normalized. Yeah.
Did you have any like reservations or pause about, obviously this is a book that involves a lot of other people in your life and you have to include some details about a lot of things going on that some people might shy away from. What was your approach to sort of what to include and how to do that?
Hmm. I think it's actually a really sparse and omitted book. I've had other books like The Red Zone and I'll Tell You in Person that were a lot about adding, right? And like beefing it up and building it up and adding more. And with this, I cut like 15,000 words. This was really like taking away. So I feel like for me, I'm like, there's nothing in here. Like, I'm like, this book's like empty. At the same time, it's loaded with really small sentences. I think like a lot of my like writing approach with this book, and something just really interesting for writers to think about, is like you can do a lot with one sentence. And that's was my approach with this. It was like, I teach writing workshops and people are like, we want to know more about this and this and like this and this. And then the writer, the poor writer getting workshop things like that they have to add, 50 pages. And I'm like, well, you could also say it in 3 words, and do a lot there. So I think I did that. Like once it gets to kind of the fallout and the divorce, and it's pretty loaded, but it's not very detailed. Compared to what actually happened with like, that would take me, that would take the rest of my life for me to write down. But instead, I just chose these like really minimal but heavy things to insert. And there's not like a ton of dialogue. There's dialogue with friends, but there's not like a ton of dialogue and like super fleshed out characters, I would say. So that was all really intentional. I really like white space. My friend who's a writer recently was like, yeah, is it even like a Chloé Caldwell book without a bunch of white space? Like, I really like white space, and I really liked it for this book particularly, because again, when I approached it, I was like, this is going to be a book of notes. I even was thinking of it as like a journal, for like people to even write in. I don't know. But yeah, and then toward the end, there were some complexities. It was like my stepdaughter, this all affected her too, the divorce. And so I wasn't quite sure how to broach that to what I said earlier of like, okay, if I were to put that in, it'd be 500 other pages, and it's just so complex and nuanced. So I at first was like, okay, what if we just completely leave her out? I've seen other writers do things like this. Leslie Jameson's book Splinters doesn't have a mention of her stepdaughter. And so I tried drafts without her in it. And then toward the end, Grey Wolf is really old school, and they actually like send you the pages in the mail, and you have to do all your like copy edit, like your last revisions that way. And so I was like sitting at my coffee table, and I was like, no, I think she needs to go in, and I think I can do it with just like a couple little interspersing. Yeah, so that's what I did. And my editor too, she also didn't know the answer. She was on the fence too. And at the end, she was like, she also had encouraged me. She's like, yeah, I think it belongs in. So it had been like a lot of conversations. And then sometimes you don't know what to do until the end of your book, especially with a book like so emotionally loaded and like in real time as this one is. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned the white space and how just the book looks and feels, because as soon as I opened it and saw like what was happening, I was like, yeah, I'm in. Because so often I think that's how life feels. I don't think back in my life in these like long, huge, 40-page chapters of what was happening. You so often think
True.
back into
Mm.
these moments, these conversations, a specific drive from here to there, a time you sat and had a coffee, and like these encapsulated moments versus these huge long things, and it just connects in a way. I think too of like Maggie Smith's memoir, You Can Make This Place
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, and that there
Mm-hmm.
are just these moments and these pieces that come
Yeah.
together into something bigger. And I love that in a memoir. I think it just works.
Yeah, that's really cool that was your reading of it. I didn't even think about it that way. And I think that, yeah, you're articulating something for me for sure. You're right, because I wouldn't sit down and be like, I'm going to write about the years I was doing fertility treatments and start at the beginning. Like, I don't remember, it's all a blur. And that's fine. You can definitely write when things are still a blur, but that wasn't the ambition that I had. Like that wasn't what I felt called to do. And yeah, there are these like snippets that were really loud during this period of my life, and others that I totally forgot. Even now I'm like, there's so much I forgot to put in. I was thinking the other day, how I had gone to Mexico, and while I was there, received a Mayan massage, like something for fertility and getting pregnant. There's like so much that I forgot, and I'm okay with that. I think it's kind of interesting, like which things I remembered and didn't remember. And again, it's not even really as much about remembering because I was writing a lot of it in real time.
I wondered as I was reading, like it felt very present, like to hear you were writing it in the moment rather than later makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, like, when you were coming to create it and to put it all together, did you know that how it was going to flow together linearly? Like, is this in the order you wrote it, or did you sort of like move things around, and how did you like compose the actual end product?
Mm-hmm. It's mostly in order. When the divorce happened and I started to write Act 3, which at the time, of course, I didn't know was Act 3 or whatever. I was just like writing things down. And when I went back to revise, once we had kind of what would look like Act 3, and I went back to do revision on like Act 1 and Act 2, we didn't really mess with those because those had been written at that point 2 years ago, so I actually wanted that to stand alone in time. It wouldn't feel honest if I was writing it with what I now knew. So I left all of that pretty much as it was. I might have went in and added a couple little details or things that once I was divorced came to mind of like, oh, that's like kind of an interesting foreshadow, not just for the book, but like for my life. I was not trying to like manipulate the reader, but like for me, I started to remember like, oh, well, that happened. And I remember at the time that was really jarring. And of course, now I would be divorced. So, like those kind of things, I put in a couple new ones, but not a ton. And I think all the different 3 sections, 3 acts have a really different feel. And when my editor and I were talking about it, I was like, okay, so Act 1 is like starting to observe the like fertility industrial complex, and starting to question fertility and IVF treatments and like looking at the world through that lens. And then Act 2 is like a little more action in the sense of like, okay, I'm going to do a couple IUIs, right? So now I'm like actually doing something about it. But both are kind of, I don't want to say somber because they're really funny. Like, I think there's a lot of funny stuff in there, but like when I just read the audiobook of this and I can feel it, I can feel the shift from Act 1, Act 2. I can feel the frustration and the hopelessness and like this kind of bleak feeling and redundancy. And then when it gets to Act 3, the tone completely changes. And that really mimics like what happened in real life. Like there was someone wrote a blurb or review, I think it was like a bookseller, said like Chloe's blind spots are the reader's blind spots. Like we're all in it together. That's what I like about it. So I'm not coming at this, starting this memoir of like, in 2023, I got divorced and looking back, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just like, we're all on the ride together.
We are all in this together, and I felt that way.
For better,
I
for worse.
for Yes, and through a lot of things. And for me, when I was reading, I don't have the experience of trying for children, but something that I do have a lot of experience in that you were also living is working in retail. And that has been most of my life up until now. And I remember laughing out loud. There's like a part where you're like, when I was back to slinging pants, and like I have been there. And I really appreciated the inclusion of that point, and also how it connects to like being at a certain point where you're like, I'm not sure what where I'm at in life and what that means, and how does it relate to how I feel and my existence as a whole. But I appreciated the inclusion
That's
of
really
the
cool.
changing pants.
Yeah, the life-changing pants. I think it was like when I was starting this book, I wanted to bring in something that was somewhat like I guess unexpected. And I felt like all the fertility stuff was so much like I was alone and it was like internal and it's like just very much in my head. And then I wanted to like put us somewhere that was like concrete where I was in conversation with other people in kind of an unexpected way. Um, and at the time I was working at the stores called Loop, Loup. I was working there, I don't know, on the weekends, like maybe 2 days a week. And when you're working with clothing all day and talking with people and the whole point of the day is like, oh, do you want to try it on? Do you want to try it on? And then people are talking to you about their bodies and the clothes and what they want to try and this size. Like it did for me, I was like, this is another aspect of like trying, and so I put it in. I also wanted to put it in because I tend to do things, I think, with my books that I'm like, I don't know if frustrated is too strong of a word, but like I miss seeing in books. So I read a lot, obviously, and I read a lot of nonfiction and memoir. And I felt like over the past decade, most people writing those are just a full-time writer or professor or writing instructor, or they're at a residency. And I feel like when I first came to writing, I really liked reading about people's work and jobs and just the mundane of day to day. And I hadn't really seen that in a while. Like a lot of popular books and especially novels, like they take place in the restaurant industry. And sometimes there's like a grocery store, but I was like, I haven't really seen this, so it could be interesting. And I was open or not to including it. And but Grey Wolf and like Yuka, they really liked those aspects. And people take away things that I wasn't intending on doing. And for example, a different review said like something about how the life-changing pants are like supposed to be inclusive and fit everyone, but they don't. And that's like such a metaphor for life too, and like IVF and all of these other things. So I thought that was like an interesting observation from that person.
And there is so much about at all these stages, whether it's where you're at in your career, where you're at in your relationships, where you're at with like your own self development, there is this aspect of there is always judgment. There's always someone having something to say about it. And there's always something that we're saying to ourselves about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when those voices meet or when they don't meet, I think it's very interesting to imagine like there are people who wouldn't put in that they were working in retail because they wouldn't really want people to know about that. There are people,
That's so funny. Yeah.
it is, but it's true. There are people who wouldn't write a book at all about trying to conceive because they
True.
wouldn't want people to know that they've done that
Yeah.
and weren't successful. And I'm putting that in air quotes because I think it's not
Yeah.
the terms I'd use, but there is this idea of what is a success and when are you, when have you made it? When have you done the thing?
That's so interesting. Yeah, I also didn't want people to know about infertility. Um, but how I usually look at it is like I like as a writer through the lens of a writer is just being like, well, okay, let's say a year from now someone else puts out a book about unexplained infertility. How would you feel? And I'm like, I would be crushed. I would be devastated. I would be so mad I didn't do it. So it's like, which is worse, right? Like having people know, but having a book and keeping going with like, the life that I've created, or hiding it and not having a book, right? And Miranda July actually said the same thing about perimenopause. She was like, I didn't want to be the one to like have to do that and have people like know my age and what I'm going through. Like it's mortifying. And yet she wanted to be the one to do it if anyone had to do it. And some of us like that's our purpose, right? I'm like, well, this is what this is who I am as a writer, and it has given me so much. And I'm like, this is the thing I can do for people and the writing community and infertility and for myself, because you're right, like a lot of people don't wake up and think, I'm going to write a book about this and I'm going to work on my book about infertility. Like, it's a unique thing. And so when you do have the calling or the drive to do it, like the worst thing you could do is not follow it.
And I think in something that can be so isolating, this is like
Yeah.
the complete, I mean, it's the most opposite of that. You've taken the step to be like, and I will no longer like be isolated on this because now everyone
Yes.
can read your story, can come to that, can put the pieces of themselves into it and get something back. And I think that that's really powerful in being able to say no, like this is this is not something where we want to be isolated. It is actually maybe
Completely.
the time, where you need someone else. And like you were saying, when it is, there's nothing that feels quite the same amount of crushing as trying to find someone's story that feels
Yeah.
like yours and you can't.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It's the worst. It's so, I mean, the other book of mine that came from a similar place of isolation is Women, actually. And I mean, I was searching for stories, right? Like, I want what happened to me. I need to see it reflected. And I could find things that were somewhat close, but not quite specific enough. And that's because I'm not looking for another story. I'm looking for mine. You know what I mean? So you have to be the one to write it. If you want it to be that specific to you, then the only answer is that you have to write it because no one else is going to pull like your hyper specificity into their book. So that like led me, that was probably the most isolated I'd ever felt in my life. And if I learned anything from that experience, it was like over time, now that's like the biggest community I have in my life. And like queer people who've related. I mean, that's the book that I have the most like letters written to me about. And so when you bring things out of the shadows, you do find community. I wrote about PMDD as well, and it was very similar with that. And people write to me about PMDD, and now it's happening with this, with like being divorced and gay. People are like writing, like so it's and I'm sure the infertility world, if they begin to read it, like I'll have people to talk to. But yeah, it's really beautiful how writing brings connection, not just to the writer, but to so many other people.
And I love the idea of being able to come to a book that maybe when you first glance, it doesn't feel like your story, but when
Mm-hmm.
you go through, you're able to put something in and to feel something back. And that is maybe one of the like singular experiences that I think you can only really find in writing is being able to connect in ways to a story that maybe shouldn't, on paper, be a story for you, and yet it is.
I love that. Yeah, I think a lot of writing, publishing, I should say, is a lot of that experience is about projection. And I mean, I do it too. I'll read a book and just project my own life onto it. Same goes for movies. So, people project onto me a lot, and that's fine. People are looking to see themselves and to feel seen and to relate to things. Yeah, it's interesting because like even with women with this book, I'm sure it's like starting to happen. It's like people start to um say things that are like not necessarily true. Like they'll be like, oh well, I thought it took place. I thought this whole time for 10 years it took place in like San Francisco. And I'll be like, no, like people just bring their own biases and their things to it. And maybe one for me it's infertility, but for someone else, maybe it's like Crohn's disease, you know what I mean? Or like an autoimmune disorder. It's like everyone has some kind of thing that they're like working through, or maybe what they're bringing to it is like desire. Steve Almond wrote a blurb that like this book is about like unrequited desire, which I thought was super interesting. And I had never thought of it that way. So even that, like when I see reviews or blurbs, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I love the most about like doing all this is that I just do the part that I can do. And then everyone takes away so many different things from it. Um, it's fascinating. It's really, really cool.
I love that. I love the way you're able to build community around
Yeah.
these works and to be able to be in conversation. And I was wondering if we could talk, speaking of all of those things, talk a little bit about some of your literary influences and some
Yeah,
writers and books that you love.
sure. Um, yeah, so many. I'm doing a column for The Believer right now about different writers and specifically like motherhood and outlaw mothers and different protagonists in novels. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I was just working on one this morning, and it's about Catherine Texier is her name, and she's a French writer. She's become like a mentor of mine. She was really one of my first influences. She wrote a book called Breakup, The End of a Love Story, and I found it in like 2008. And I love the title first, like the end of a love story. Like, what's that? I was, trying to learn to write and be a writer. And it's funny because Catherine references this book as a diary. And now I write in that form too. Like, it influenced me more than I think I'm even aware of. But it was a book about her divorce and really raw, very urgent, white space, really just emotionally driven. And I remember when I read that, it really like changed everything. I was like, oh wow, you can write about this stuff and you can do it in this way. And there's something about that that's very empowering. So she's huge for me. Her book Breakup, The End of a Love Story. Her newer book is called After David, which is about a woman in her 60s having a relationship with a 37-year-old man. And she's just really always bringing in these like different taboos. And she also writes a lot of autofiction. So definitely her. Lidia Yuknavtich was a really huge influence for me also when I was beginning. I know everyone now says that, but for sure, like in 2010, 11, when I read Chronology of Water, it was the same kind of feeling that I could write that way and it would be okay, and I didn't know any other way to write. So I was like, okay, thank God. I'm a huge Lidia fan. Um, Definitely some of the Grey Wolf people like Maggie Nelson for sure. I've always loved her work. The Argonauts and Bluets, I feel like in some ways are in conversation with this book a bit.
Um, I wonder too if you have sort of a reader that you really hope finds this book, someone that you really would love to have encounter this, like in a bookstore on a table.
I think, let's see, if I were to stumble into, I guess that has happened to me before. Like I stumbled into the Strand actually on like my 35th birthday, and I found a book influence called Notes to Self by Emilie Pine. She's a writer in the UK. And I couldn't believe it because it was my 35th birthday and I definitely had fertility on the mind. And she has an amazing essay in there about fertility. She actually has, do you know that book?
Mm-mm.
Okay, she has, it's maybe like, let's say 4 or 5 essays, and each one is a different kind of taboo topic. So there's like grief, there's infertility, there's miscarriage, there's alcoholism. Like it's so good. And I love her writing so much. And I love a book that's like a book of notes, which is kind of what I wanted for trying. So I found Notes to Self. I was just so happy to like find a book I hadn't ever heard of. Like, being in this world, I'm like a lot of the contemporary books, I'm like, I know the writers, they're my friends, like I've heard of stuff, but so it's so exciting to be like, what's this? So I got that and it was huge for me because it was hard. She actually also did not have a child. Um, and I think now she's actually quoted in Trying. I actually talk about that book in Trying. So like all these books are sort of in conversation. So I guess I would just want like that to happen for someone else where they're going through whatever they're going through, whether it's grief, whether it's infertility, reckoning with queerness, divorce, so many different things. But like we said, or they're projecting, something else and they see the book. And what I like about the book is that it has this like frustrated scribble on it. So hopefully that can speak to people. So yeah, I really am a firm believer that books find you at the right time. It's happened to me my whole life. And like books are never, unless they go out of print, which they do, they're always around. So maybe someone finds this in like 15 years, you know?
Yeah, I love that too. The idea, like, I always think there is truly a book for everyone. Like, even if reading is not your thing, even if it's not, something that comes like naturally to you, I truly think there's a book out there for everyone, because there's the number of times, like you said, where something has found me at the right time. It's like, oh,
Scary.
I have to believe.
Yeah. And I think too, I don't do this on purpose. It's just been how women and trying have become with the white space and being like on the shorter side. People have said to me like, oh, I don't read, but I read it because it's short and like easier, because it's like these short paragraphs. So they don't feel, especially in like how the attention economy is now. It's like people like a short book and they like if there's white space and they can just like pick it up and kind of open to a page, do one paragraph and move on. And it doesn't feel as daunting to people as like a 600-page novel.
Yeah, there's something about matching that to where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do think it's why I love short stories, and why it's like, I have to remind myself, like, if I can sit and look at Instagram for 25 minutes, like, I could also probably sit and read a short
So
story.
true.
I just
It's
need
so
to shift
true.
my brain over.
I think about that all the time. Yeah, totally. You're like, instead of scrolling, like we could all read, multiple poetry books a day.
I know. And I'll get
Easily.
there. I will get there.
Same,
But
same.
I know it is where we're at, but I think there is so much to say about, I think, the ability for us to see stories in other people, in each other. And I think it helps us see the stories in ourselves, to be like, oh, maybe I won't ever write a memoir, but there are things that I could write about. And that's reassuring to me, even to be like, I probably won't ever do it, but I could. There are stories.
Why won't you ever do it?
Wow. Maybe I will.
That you
Maybe I will.
shouldn't, you don't say that. Yeah, you should say, maybe I'll do it, instead of I won't ever do it. This is how I
Okay.
talk. This is like, because I'm always with students who say stuff like
Yes.
that. Yeah, just make it more like neutral,
A
I
good
might
call.
and I might not, maybe.
My memoir about how much I've scrolled on Instagram.
I mean, relatable, right?
Yes. Yes.
We need that. We need that. That's actually missing in the marketplace.
You're right. I'm like, actually, let me
You
write a
need
pitch right now.
you want to see your own story reflected. There you go.
Yes.
So
Perfect.
funny.
Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, so I just want to ask if there's anything else that you want readers, listeners, audience to know about trying.
Oh God.
Easy questions.
Keep trying. Yeah, I just signed it for one of my best friends and I wrote like, we are always forever trying. And then I realized I can really sign these books in a fun way, because I can make a sentence out of like this page to sign says trying, so I can like write sentences. I was like, wait, this is really cool. Yeah, I would say keep trying whatever it is, and also know when to give up. There's trying and there's stopping trying, right? My next book, no, I'm just kidding, but like, stop trying is kind of funny. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like this. I think being engaged with grief and the hard things that go on. I mean, I think I would be a lot less happy right now in my life if I hadn't written this book, and if I hadn't engaged with like the hard things and kept it all in the recesses and the shadows, and like, yeah, whatever people are going through, like there's someone else going through it and probably worse, and that's one gift that the internet has given us, and that books have given us. I know for me, I'm like, I want to read about like someone that kind of like, yeah, is also in pain, and like what, because it's like empowering. It's like, oh, this person had that resilience, then I can get through this, So definitely like get it for your friend who's divorcing. I would say that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this book. I have loved it, and I can't wait for everyone to get their hands on it. So thank you so much, Chloe.
Thank you, Jenna. I loved your questions. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.